and welcome to the public version of the weekly video cast on davidicke.com with David Icke and myself, Richie Allen. Hope you're well. Hope you've had a good week. Good morning, David.
Morning, Rich.
It's been a very, very busy week, hasn't it? And it's been dominated by two issues. Brexit, which I'm sure you'll talk about at some stage later on, but the announcement by Donald Trump this week that the United States will recognise Jerusalem as the capital city of Israel. That's been making the headlines all week and today as well. What have you made of that? What's really going on there, do you think?
Well, it's the most predictable decision you could even begin to imagine. I mean, even I have been taken aback by how much in the new book, Everything You Need to Know But Have Never Been Told, that I only finished about 6 weeks ago, it's just published, that is actually happening already. And what this whole recognition of Jerusalem as the Israeli capital and the moving of the US embassy is about is a process that began long ago of Israel taking over that entire area of land and removing the Palestinians who were there before from that whole area, what is known as the Greater Israel Project, the expansion of Israel project. And there's so many dots that can be connected here. First of all, let's start out with a basic one. The claim that that land is the ancient land of Israel, of a people who go back to the ancient people of Israel. Well, they're not. It's now well documented, not least by Israeli historians, that the overwhelming, vast majority, at least, of Jewish people today don't come from biblical Israel at all. They come from an area in the Caucasus and southern Russia, which was known as Khazaria. And in 740 AD, there was a mass conversion of those people who weren't from Israel and weren't Jewish, a mass conversion to, or Jewish as we call them, they were a mass conversion to the religion of Judaism. And the Khazaria king was known as the Kagan. This is why Kagan is such a common Jewish name today. And as the Khazaria Empire broke up, then the people moved northwards. They moved into Eastern Europe and eventually into Western Europe. And they were the people that were outrageously, grotesquely targeted by the Nazis in Germany. And as a result of that and massive manipulation by the House of Rothschild, great numbers of those people then were moved into what was then Palestine. The whole Balfour Declaration, in which the then very openly powerful Britain supported a homeland for Jewish people in Palestine, was actually a letter written by the Foreign Secretary, Lord Balfour, who was an inner circle initiate of a secret society in London called the Round Table. And he wrote that letter, that Balfour Declaration, which was so powerful in moving on this movement to take over that land of Palestine. He sent it to Lord Rothschild, who funded and essentially created the Round Table Secret Society. You don't see that story in the historical records of the Balfour Declaration, which of course just had its 100th anniversary. So first of all, we have a claim to this land, which is based on what is claimed to have been said by the Old Testament God. You know, in the book, I've quoted Israeli politicians who were justifying the taking over of Palestine. The invasion from Europe of Palestine, if we break it down to its basic truth, that was justified because a God quoted in an Old Testament written by who knows when, in who knows what circumstances,
Yeah.
said that that's how things are. So the whole foundation of the existence of Israel is based on nonsense. However, we are where we are now, and you can't at this point say to Israelis, Jewish people in Israel, you've all got to get out and leave and find somewhere else to live. Not least because there are great numbers of people in Israel who don't support what their far right government under Netanyahu and others is doing to the Palestinians. But if we are going to have, and if it was really desired from the Israeli regime's point of view and America's point of view, that there would be an end to the conflict and a coming together. A coming together means a living together. A living together means rights, the same rights for all parties. Now, that's the only way that this is going to be resolved, through fairness, through justice, and through everyone having the same rights as everyone else. Now, of course, that's not happening, and it's not happening for a simple reason. They don't want it to happen because they don't want a peaceful settlement. You see, this is the thing that I say people need to understand. I've got a headline in front of me talking about Trump opening the gates of hell, basically, in terms of violent reaction from the Arab world and Palestinian groups in response to this announcement this week, which they knew what would happen as a result of it. And this headline says, outrage from 1.5 billion Muslims throughout the world, and Hamas threatens new intifada as Trump says Jerusalem is Israel's capital. Now, to understand what's going on, we need to understand that that's exactly what they want. Because, you see, if you want a peaceful settlement, then you go down the road I'm talking about. But if you want an excuse to further acquire more and more of the land of Palestine until there's basically no Palestinians left there, then what you want is an excuse to do that. I mean, and the Israeli regime needs very little excuse.
Very little.
I mean, we've seen again with the Gaza mass murder that happens from time to time, that very, shall we say, coincidentally, just when this Israel regime wants another go at Gaza to bomb the innocent from the sky, then somebody or some people within Gaza start firing the equivalent of pop gun missiles into Israel, which hardly have the power to make a hole in the road. And in response to that comes state-of-the-art weaponry provided by the United States and the billions that it gives over to Israel every year. And it's the equivalent of someone throwing a stone at you, and then you respond with machine gun fire, and you say, I was only defending myself.
That's right.
So this is the equivalent of what happens. And what we're seeing here, again, is on one level, there are many levels to it, the manipulation of a hostile response against Israel that will then be used to justify the state-of-the-art weapons response to it, and the acquisition of more and more land. And this whole situation this week can really, and much of what's happened since Trump came to power, can only be understood from the perspective that the ultra-Zionist inner core that runs Israel and answers to the Rothschilds, own Donald Trump. When they say jump, he breaks the Olympic high jump record.
Yeah.
This is the dynamics of it. They put him into power. I mean, his biggest backer was this guy, Sheldon Adelson, this Israeli American dual citizen, this casino magnate and media owner who is extremely close to the regime in Israel. And so he's put into power, and he's from day one virtually has given his administration over to ultra-Zionist American Israeli dual citizens to run his operation. The first thing he did, because you don't get the kind of money, millions and millions, that were given to him by people like Adelson, and there's no clause in the contract that says what they get back for it.
That's right.
It doesn't happen like that.
Yeah.
They are buying influence. They are buying the president. That's why they do it. And from day one, he handed the American economy over to the ultra-Zionist front, Goldman Sachs, with the Mnuchin, Stephen Mnuchin, as his Treasury Secretary. Another one, Carl Icke, a special advisor to the president on regulatory reform, and the director of the White House Economic Council is also an ultra-Zionist and former CEO, etc., of Goldman Sachs. And so the Treasury was handed over immediately, control of finance. And of course, the person nearest and closest to Trump, I say his handler, is his son-in-law, Jared Kushner. Now, he's been mentioned a few times in relation to this fake, ludicrous Russia investigation for talking to allegedly Russian contacts. But what this Russian investigation is doing into so-called Russian manipulation of the last US election, it's for two reasons. One, it's to stop any coming together between the United States and Russia. And two, it's to deflect where the real control is coming from, and that is Israel. I mean, Jared Kushner has known Benjamin Netanyahu virtually his entire life. Netanyahu was talked about sleeping in Kushner's bed when in the family home, because Netanyahu is very, very close friend of Kushner's father, Charles Kushner. And he's a real estate mogul who was jailed for illegal campaign contributions, tax evasion, and witness tampering. So he's in good company.
Yeah.
Sure, they get on like a house on fire.
Nice guy, yeah.
And so then you look at Kushner's background. He's quite blatantly an agent of Israel. He has funded illegal settlements in Israel, something he was exposed for very recently, and not disclosing it when he should. And he's got big business connections to George Soros, another one of these massive manipulators of American politics. And he is a funder of the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, AIPAC, which is the lobby arm, the massively money no object lobby arm of Israel in the United States. And so Trump does what this network tells him. If you go further into the rabbit hole around Trump, Rich, Kushner's special assistant, his own special assistant, is another ultra-Zionist, Avram Berkowitz, and another Trump senior advisor alongside Kushner is another Zionist called Stephen Miller. And the president also has a list. Trump also has a list of special assistants who are Zionists. He named his own lawyer, the extreme Zionist David Friedman, as his ambassador to Israel. So he's going to be fair. Jason Greenblatt, who's executive vice president and chief legal officer to Trump and the Trump organization. He's now his advisor on Israel, and he became U.S. Special Representative for International Negotiations, which include negotiations between Israel and the Palestinians. So the whole thing is completely stitched up, and what Trump does is what Israel wants him to do. And once you start to put this together and realize this, then these decisions, like what has happened this week, become obvious.
And yet,
it becomes obvious why Trump has focused his attention on demonizing Iran, because Israel has a long plan to change the regime in Iran. So it's all connecting together, and what they want is another excuse to send the boys in as a result of quote defending themselves.
And Max Blumenthal, speaking to RT in the week, agrees with you in terms of the influence of Kushner and the fact that he might be handling Trump. And yet all the US and UK media want to talk about is evidence that Trump is under the thumb of Vladimir Putin, when it's screaming out that the Israeli lobby is controlling the White House. It's extraordinary, really. But then I suppose it isn't extraordinary. If it wasn't, why would we be doing this now, today, talking about it? The stones being thrown yesterday, David, and the live ammunition being fired back, is this a real concern that over the next few days it could escalate into something very, very serious like we've seen in recent years?
Well, we'll have to see how it goes, but all I can say is that's what Israel wants. Yeah. It wants the excuse to take the military route to further suppress and oppress this tragic Palestinian people. And by the way, before we leave the point about Trump and the White House, let's not just think that this has just happened with Trump. You look back to the Barack Obama administration, and the two key people that got him into power and ran his campaigns and basically made him the political quote success that he was, were Rahm Emanuel, who was his White House Mr. Fix-It, and now mayor of Chicago, and David Axelrod, who ran his two election campaigns. These people also answered to Israel. And when you look at, again, the sequence of events going back to the creation of Israel, and I've written this in my books, there was a distinct plan and policy once Israel was established in 1948 to send people, agents of Israel, to America so that their children would be born as American citizens, who could then rightly get involved in politics without being seen as an outsider. And the classic case of that was Rahm Emanuel's father, who openly boasts about his involvement with Zionist terrorist groups that bombed Israel into existence and forced something like 800,000 Palestinians from their own land in terror. And he moved to America in this scheme, shall we say, and of course produced Rahm Emanuel. And we've just talked about what happened to him. He's got other sons that are involved in American society in different areas as well. But this is what the policy was. It was to see if you know that if you want massive global influence, then you have to impact yourself upon those countries that have massive global influence. The first one you're going to head for is the United States, and you've had Cynthia McKinney, the former Congresswoman, on your show, talking about the fact that when you run for office in America, a political office, then you are approached by the Zionist groups to, quote, sign the pledge to Israel, to sign the pledge that you will do everything that basically Israel wants, in truth. And if you don't sign the pledge, then you find that your ability to raise money to run for office is seriously curtailed. This is what is happening. And what we have, which is also very, very topical this week because of what we've uncovered and what's been on your show, is that there is a network of Zionist attack dog groups that answer ultimately to Israel, which are there to brand anyone who talks about this and exposes this as anti-Semitic, therefore enforcing upon them the pressure to be silenced. And all these things fit together. It's part of one web. So when, as you've had this week, an interview with the Irish journalist Kevin Myers, who had his journalistic career, a very, very long journalistic career, destroyed by these ultra-Zionist hate groups, like the Campaign Against Anti-Semitism, you see how far we've now gone and how advanced this now is, when a journalist who has shown himself in his writings over a long period of time to be pro-Israel and supportive of Israel has his career destroyed for being anti-Semitic, for what was an innocuous, to anyone with a smear of maturity and a smear of brain power, a innocuous article that he wrote, which mentioned how Jewish people were very good with money. But what this is doing, and if anyone listening to this has not listened to the Kevin Myers interview with Richie this week, then go to davidicke.com and I do advise you listen to it, because it is extraordinary when he's describing what happened to him, and not just what he says, but the fact that he's saying it, someone big time from the mainstream of journalism, and how his own newspaper, the Sunday Times, and his own profession turned on him, the political class turned on him, because there is a tyranny going on here of terrorizing people into silence to stop the sort of things we're talking about here from coming out. And what is happening is that while these Zionist hate groups deny that something is happening, therefore you're anti-Semitic if you say it, week after week, proof that it's happening comes more and more to light, which is why the hysteria to silence people pointing that out is getting more and more hysterical.
It is, but I think ultimately there's, in the last few weeks, particularly with what happened here in Manchester, and with the chain of evidence and emails between this group and the Derbyshire police, also to be found on davidicke.com, they're not, I think their day in the sun, this particular group anyway, is going to come to an end really soon. I think these guys have no idea what they'd bitten off. They'd bitten off far more than they could imagine that they could chew, to use that old saying. And it's coming to the surface now who these people are and what they're doing, David. I really believe that.
Well, they operate in the shadows overwhelmingly, and they operate through the unquestioning media, who are terrified of them.
Yeah,
let's not mess about. The mainstream media are terrified of these tiny ultra-Zionist hate groups, not least the CAA, because what happened to Kevin Myers has a number of levels in terms of the reason for it. And one of them is to say to mainstream journalists, if we can get him, we can get anybody. So you better not take us on. You better not question us. You better not question our destruction of freedom of speech, because if you do, this is what happens. And it's in the end, it's the jelly-spined mainstream media, the jelly-spined ignorant political classes that allow these hate groups to prevail. And therefore, on the bigger picture, because it all connects, to allow things to happen in the world that suit Israel without the truth of why they're happening being exposed, because these hate groups are running around trying to silence everybody who even begins to question that Israel is not God's gift to everything that ever existed. But we are starting to turn the spotlight on these people, and when you do, it's a very dark and dirty corner that the light exposes, and we need to go on doing that, because no one, who else is going to do it? Who else has got the backbone to do it? Not the mainstream media, and because everything is connected to everything else, the spineless mainstream media is contributing to the disgusting treatment of Palestinians over this long period of time by being too terrified to expose the truth. And you've only got to look, Richie, when we're talking earlier about Trump being a creation of this ultra-Zionist lobby, when you realize that the moment that he was elected, Netanyahu pressed the button on a long list of expansions of illegal settlements in Palestinian land, because he knew he was going to get no resistance from this incoming president, because they owned them, and thus the building in illegal settlements, illegal under international law, has got faster and faster and faster. More and more Palestinians are being kicked out of the homes they've lived in for generations to make room for them. And I've got a story in front of me here from today on davidicke.com. Emboldened by US President Donald Trump's recognition of Jerusalem as Israel's capital, the Israeli regime is planning to push ahead with plans to build around 14,000 new settler units in the city of Jerusalem. And they are doing this because they know they're not going to get any resistance, because they own the President of the United States. This is the reality that we're facing. And what these hate groups are there specifically to stop being exposed.